It's good to know, thanks to that speech, that once again, the limitation to innovation is not the youth, it's us folks, the folks that are in the boardrooms, the older people. So there's hope for you guys. Thank you. Right after the next speaker, which is the last thing in the evening, we have live music and cocktails. So if you're thirsty, just work it out just a little bit more. It gives me great pleasure to invite the next speaker on stage, Jacob Morgan. He's highly accomplished. He's been mentioned by authors that I like a lot. People like Dan Pink. If you've heard of Dan Pink, you know who I'm talking about. He's a columnist for Forbes. He frequently writes for Wall Street Journal, for Fast Company. He's a founder of FOW. This is a network for the world's most futurist, forward-thinking people. All right, with that introduction, a big warm applause to Jacob Morgan, please.
Hola. Buenos tardes. Mi amo es Jacob. Y that's all the Spanish I know. But I'm learning. So it's the end of the day. We're sitting in a dark room. There's no windows. Let's talk about managers. Before we get started, though, can we turn on the lights for just 1 second? Just a little bit, just so I can see some of the people. Now, if you'll indulge me for a minute, I want to do a little bit of an experiment. Can everybody please stand up? Okay, great. Now everybody, put your arms up in the air like this. Now stand on one leg. Now on the count of 3, when I say 1, 2, 3, everybody yell out the word future. Ready? 1, 2, 3, future. Great, thank you. You guys can all sit down. Now, there's quite a few people in this room, a couple hundred people. Does the fact that I was able to get all of you to stand up and stand on one leg and put your arms in the air, does that in any way make me a leader? I'm sure many of you guys already know the answer to this question, which is, of course, no. Now, I'm curious, when you guys think of the word leader, what are some of the words or the qualities or attributes that you think of? Just shout them out. What does leader mean to you? What was that? Empowerment. A couple more. Inspiration. Perfect. Give me a couple more. What was that? Goal setting. Okay. Maybe 1 or 2 more. Communication. What was the one up here? Example? Perfect. Now, what about when I say the word manager? What are some of the words that you think of? Boss. Authority. Can I repeat that out loud? He said asshole. I didn't say that. He said, up here. A couple others. What was that? Order. One more. Control. See, we have always been taught within our schools and conditioned within our organizations that managers and leaders are 2 separate people. And as a result of this, we have a huge problem within a lot of our organizations because we have leaders who cannot manage and we have managers who don't know how to lead. Now, a leader that doesn't know how to manage is able to paint a picture. He has a vision, an idea of where he wants to go. But he doesn't necessarily have the skills when it comes to strategy or tactics to be able to get to where he needs to go. Now, after I graduated college, I went to work for a technology company in Los Angeles. And keep in mind, I was just out of college, so this was my first job. And I go to work for this company, and one day the manager calls a meeting. And it's a standard meeting. I'm sure you've all been to many of these types of meetings. There's around 8 or 10 of us. We're sitting in a room, a conference room. In the middle is a jug of water, some breath mints. And in the back is the manager with a whiteboard And for the next hour, hour and a half, he goes over goals, projections, benchmarks, tasks, deliverables, all the types of things that a manager you would expect to do. Now, after that meeting, a couple of us went out to lunch. The manager didn't come with us. And I vividly remember the conversations that these employees were having when the manager wasn't there. They didn't trust him. They were saying how much they didn't trust him, how much they didn't feel safe around him, how much they didn't like his ideas, how much they didn't feel that this manager deserved the position that he was given. Not a lot of nice things to say about this guy. And that really got me thinking, how is it that this person was put into a position of power where he's supposed to be leading this organization? How is it that he was put into this position, yet he was clearly not a leader? To be a leader, you need one thing. You need followers. You need followers. If people don't follow you, you cannot lead. Leadership is not, to be a leader, it's not something that you are promoted to. And so that was my first interaction with this idea of management and leadership years ago. And I've been thinking about that for a long time. Now, on the other hand, we have managers that don't know how to lead. Now, a manager who doesn't know how to lead isn't able to build the trust and engagement required from his team to get to where he needs to go. And this is exactly why we have such high levels of disengagement within our organizations. I think the latest numbers from Gallup show that 83% of employees around the world are not engaged in their jobs. They are zombies that just show up to take a paycheck and to leave. And it's precisely because we have too many managers that are not leaders. We are putting the wrong people in these official roles of power. And that is because, who do we promote? Usually, we promote the people that are good at maintaining the status quo. They are good at taking orders, they are good at giving orders, they don't cause any problems, and they keep things in order. Right? That is who an ideal manager is. And because of that, that's how our organizations are structured. Right? And it's causing a lot of problems for organizations. And we take our cues oftentimes from the military, right? Because that's how a lot of our companies have been structured, based and modeled after the military. Now, the only thing worse than having a manager who cannot lead is having leaders within our organizations that aren't given the opportunity to become managers. Many of you are leaders here. Many of you work shoulder to shoulder with leaders at your organization. These are people that have followers, people that inspire trust, people that inspire and empower others, people that others want to emulate. These are the leaders in our organizations. These are the people that we should be promoting and making managers, right? And instead, what do? We promote the people that maintain the status quo, and then we give them leadership training. We have it backwards. Now, in order to understand how we got to this point, we have to look at what's been going on within our organizations over the past couple decades. Now, management and managers were created, the whole idea of why managers were created was to maintain control. In other words, if we all worked at the same company, and I was your manager, which would be quite unfortunate, I promise you, but if we all worked at the same company and I was your manager, what would my job be? To make sure that you all show up on time, to make sure that you all wear your uniforms, right, your dress code, to make sure that you don't cause any problems, you don't hit anybody, to make sure that everything runs smoothly, and that you don't ask any questions and everything just flows, right? That is the idea of a manager. That is why managers were created, to make sure that things stay as they are, to make sure that the ship keeps going in the same direction. Not only that, but the goal of a manager is to figure out a way to do whatever the company is doing today, we need to do tomorrow, but better, faster, cheaper, with fewer resources. That's the idea of a manager, right? That is why management was created. There's a former submarine captain by the name of David Marquet. And he wrote a book called Turn the Ship Around, which I highly recommend you guys check out. And in that book, he tells a very, very interesting story. In the 90s, David was supposed to take command of a nuclear-powered submarine, which, how cool is that? He was supposed to take control of a nuclear-powered submarine called the USS Olympia. Now, the USS Olympia was the pride of the naval fleet. They consistently outperformed everybody else on training maneuvers. They had a high engagement rate. Employee turnover was low. It was the perfect submarine. Naturally, David was very excited to take control over this vessel. So he spent a lot of time understanding everything he could about the entire crew, about the submarine. He knew everyone and everything like the back of his hand. Shortly before he was to take control of the USS Olympia, the captain of another submarine called the USS Santa Fe quit. And they couldn't have a submarine with no captain. So they called up David and they said, David, we have new orders for you. You're not taking control of the USS Olympia. Instead, you're going to take control of the USS Santa Fe. Now, the Santa Fe was the exact opposite ship of the USS Olympia. The engagement was very low, the turnover was very high, and it was a submarine that consistently underperformed in everything that it did. But David came in, he had a little bit of arrogance about him. He just completed a 1-year leadership training program that the Naval Academy gave him. And he was taught that in order to have a good ship, you have to give good orders. If I'm the captain and I give good orders, damn it, I'm going to have a good ship. And so he went in to this role thinking that all he needs to do is give good orders. So one day he's out with his crew and they're doing training maneuvers. And he wanted to simulate what would happen if the nuclear reactor had a meltdown. So he shuts off the nuclear reactor and he gives his crew an order, ahead 2/3. Now, ahead 2/3 means that the submarine has to be powered at 2/3 its maximum capacity. Now, in the Navy, when the captain gives an order, the navigator repeats the order, and then the helmsman is the one that actually acts upon the order. So David yells, ahead 2/3, and the navigator says, ahead 2/3, and nothing happens. David looks at the helmsman who's, squirming around. He looks very uncomfortable, and he goes up to him and he says, what's going on? Didn't you do anything? Didn't you hear my order? I told you what to do. And the helmsman looks at David and says, sir, there's no ahead 2/3 on this submarine, sir. And so David looked very confused, and he went to the navigator and he said, did you know that there was no ahead 2/3 on this submarine? And the navigator calmly looks at him, smiles, and says, yes, sir, I did. And David says, well, then why did you repeat the order that I gave you when you knew it was the wrong order? And some of you can guess what his response was. Because you told me so, right? And that is how a lot of our organizations today operate, on this idea that if somebody tells you what to do, you have to do it, no questions asked. Our organizations are really starting to change now, and we're starting to realize that engagement and inspiration and empowerment and creativity and all these things really do matter. But why? Why is it that we're now starting to realize that? There are 5 trends that are dramatically shaping the way work is getting done. Trend number 1, globalization. Globalization is essentially this idea and concept of living in a world where boundaries of any kind do not exist. The language that you speak, the culture that you subscribe to, the currency that you transact in, where you live, none of that is mattering anymore. I mean, I live in the Bay Area in San Francisco. Here I am in Spain, right? Where you live, and none of those things matter anymore. The entire world is becoming just like a city. And a lot of these technologies are enabling that to happen. So that's trend number 1, globalization. Trend number 2, mobility. A couple of years ago, a college buddy of mine and myself, we took a trip to China. We went to China for a month. And we went to all the major cities that you would expect to go to, Shanghai, Beijing, etc. And we went to the Yunnan province. And in the Yunnan province, we decided to take bikes and just go bike out in the middle of nowhere and go see some rice paddy fields. So we get these bikes, we take some food, we take some water, and we go biking out in the middle of nowhere. We bike for hours and hours, and then we stop. Look around, as far as the eye can see, it's just green, mountains, rice paddy fields, 70 degrees outside, Fahrenheit, not Celsius. Clouds in the sky, a little bit of sun. It was perfect. And I look around, and I see that there is a rice paddy farmer in one of the fields, which I thought, interesting. I get to see what he's doing. He was doing his regular chores. The rice paddy farmer stops for a minute, reaches into his hand, or reaches into his pocket, and he pulls out a smartphone. And I was fascinated by that, because I live in the Bay Area, which many people consider to be the technology and innovation hub of the world. Here we are, thousands of miles away from the Bay Area, out in the middle of nowhere, and here is a rice paddy farmer with a smartphone that has access to the same people, the same information, the same content that I do living in San Francisco. That is mobility. Where you are in the world no longer matters. As long as you can connect to the web, you can get your job done on anywhere, anytime, and on any device. Trend number 3, technology. We heard some previous speakers talk about technology, and the technologies are numerous. Big data, the cloud, the Internet of Things, robots and automation, wearable devices like this smartwatch that I have on. All of these new technologies are flying into our organizations, and they're changing the way that we work and why we work and how we work. And a lot of our organizations are struggling, and they're trying to figure out how to adapt. And a lot of these technologies are coming from our personal lives, from the consumer web. Right? A lot of the technology platforms that we use within our companies are based off of things like Facebook and Twitter. A lot of the platforms that we use at home are now being thrown into our companies. So that's the third trend. Trend number 4, new behaviors. If I were to go back in time and find one of you on the streets, which would be creepy, I know, but if I were to go back in time and find one of you on the streets 10, 15 years ago and say, you know what, one day I'm going to know everything about you. I'm going to be able to know your entire work history. I'm going to be able to tell who you're friends with, what you like, where you live, where you've traveled to. I'm going to know everything about you. You would think that I'm probably nuts and try to have me committed to a mental institution or arrested. But now look at the world that we live in today. We put up all of our information on LinkedIn. We tell people where we are on Foursquare. We review restaurants on Yelp. We put up pictures and tell everybody who we're friends with on Facebook. Right? It's amazing that we live in such a public life. So we have all shifted our behaviors as far as how we communicate, how we collaborate, how we share, how we learn, how we educate others. All of these new behaviors are making their way into our organizations. That's trend number 4. The 5th and final trend is around demographics, specifically around millennials. I know that's been kind of the big trend that we've been hearing, and for good reason. By 2020, millennials are expected to comprise 50% of the workforce. 50%. By 2025, that number is expected to be 75%. This is a massive group. Now, what's particularly fascinating about millennials is that this is a generation that doesn't necessarily know what it's like to commute an hour and a half each way to and from work. It's a generation that doesn't necessarily know what it's like to use legacy technologies. It's a generation that doesn't know what it's like to get annual reviews, right? So we're dealing with a new type of generation. Now, what's particularly fascinating about demographics is that we're also seeing people retire later, and we're seeing more generations of employees working side by side within the workforce. Now, oftentimes when we think about these new behaviors and things related to the future of work, we tend to gravitate towards a younger generation. We tend to move towards kind of this younger age group. But that's not necessarily the case. In fact, what we're starting to see is that regardless of how old you are, all of these new behaviors are being common across any age group, whether you're 22, 52, or 72. So these 5 trends are causing amazing, amazing change within our organizations. And they're causing us to challenge the one big assumption that we have always had about companies. And the one big assumption that we've always had about companies is that employees need to work there. In other words, if you want to pay for your mortgage, if you want to pay for your car payments, if you want to be able to get gifts for your kids during the holidays, you need money. which means you need to work for a large organization. That was kind of the common standard, the common assumption. Today, that's no longer the case. People are working for startups. They're raising money on Indiegogo or GoFundMe. They're creating products that they're selling on Etsy. They're becoming Uber and Lyft drivers. They're becoming freelancers where they create profiles on Elance and Odesk. So we are seeing an enormous change in why organizations exist. And it's causing a tremendous and fierce war for talent. Now, Dan Pink had a great quote, which I think sums up what we're seeing very nicely. And he said, talented people need organizations far less than organizations need talented people. In other words, if you have skills and if you are good at something, the organization needs you much more than you need the organization. So how is that assumption being challenged? A lot of organizations are understanding that they have to move from creating a place where they assume that employees need to work there to creating an environment where they want to work there. And we can't create this type of an environment unless we have managers that are leaders. The very survival of our organizations going forward depends on our ability to make sure that managers are leaders. If managers do not have followers, if they are not respected, if they don't build trust, they should not be promoted. They should not be the managers of our organizations. Because these are the ones that are going to be deciding what our companies look like. And I can guarantee you, and I interview a lot of companies and I see this all the time, when you promote the wrong people, they create the wrong type of company, and people do not want to work for those types of companies. So we're shifting away from assuming that organizations are a place of need to one where they are a place of want. So what does that mean? If we want to create an organization that survives and thrives, if we want to create an organization where employees want to show up every day, if we want to create an organization where people bring their hopes, their ideas, their passions, their fears, their aspirations, all of these things to work with them. If we want to create this type of environment, then we have to have managers within our organizations that are leaders. That's the only way to do it. It's the only way to do it. So what do? I mean, what should we start thinking about? There are a couple things. One is in our educational institutions, we need to stop separating management and leadership, managers and leaders. We need to teach these things as interdisciplinary things that cannot live without the other. You have to have both. You cannot have one. We cannot assume and keep teaching and keep practicing this idea that a manager and a leader are two separate people, because that doesn't teach the right thing. It sends the wrong message to the students and to the companies that exist. Instead, we should be saying that managers are leaders. All managers are leaders. Every manager that we have at our company is a leader. Right? Every manager that you promote must be a leader. The second thing that we need to start doing is taking the leaders within our organization, finding out who they are. And many of you already know who they are. We need to take those people and we need to give them mentoring. We need to give them the resources that they need to become managers within our organizations. We need to give them the tools, we need to give them the resources, and those are the people that we need to be making managers within our organizations. Now imagine what your organization would look like if every manager was a leader. Imagine what your organization would look like. You show up to work, and every manager that you know, and if you're a manager, you're included in this, every manager is a leader, meaning every manager that was given that position has followers. Every manager that works at that company knows how to empower and inspire and build trust. Every single one. What would your organization look like? And ask yourself, wouldn't you want to work at that type of an organization? And more importantly, wouldn't you want to be that type of a manager? Thank you. It's going to be Q&A for a couple minutes.
Sure, if you wish.
Yeah. So I left a couple minutes for questions at the very end. If anybody wants to ask any questions or have a dialogue or start a discussion around any of this. Anybody? And I'm going to be here afterwards, too, if nobody wants to speak up in front of a... Yes? Yes? Yeah, when I was there, so I used to have a blog called, and I'll repeat the question. It's what happens in organizations or in countries such as China when they're trying to block things down, and they're blocking Facebook, they're blocking certain sites. It's interesting that you mentioned that, because my website was actually blocked in China when I tried to access it, because I used words like social business and social media, and this was a couple years ago. And the word social in China does not go over very well. So that was definitely blocked there. However, what we're starting to see, I don't think those efforts are going to be sustainable. I mean, we're already starting to see, there's a company called FireChat, I don't know if anybody's heard of, where citizens are coming together to find ways to get around what local governments are trying to do. So for example, when organizations or when people use FireChat, they're able to bypass any type of government restrictions or rules. It uses every cell phone, and I don't know the technical specifications of it, but it uses every cell phone and connects them together and creates kind of its own type of network. So I think when organizations or when governments try to block these types of things, people are going to find a way around it, and we're already starting to see that happen. So hopefully that answers your question. I don't think it's going to be sustainable. I think people will find a way around it, and they already are. They already are. Any other questions? Going once? Going twice? Okay, great. Well, thank you. I'll be out there if anybody wants to talk after.
Thanks, Jacob.
Thank you.